You're listening to Security Pro Insights. Whether it's a cyber breach or a physical security breach that we hear about on the news today, most often the breach can be traced back to the human being, the employee who was manipulated to allow access to a critical area. This approach is called social engineering. And our guest today, Sean Ahrens, also known as the Social Engineering Ninja, is going to help us better understand what social engineering is, how it is often implemented, some tactics, and how we can better train the people in our organizations to be prepared for these threats, to report these threats, and to ensure that the organization is always safe. Sean, I want to thank you for being a guest again on the Security Pro Insights podcast. Of course, you were one of our guests in the very first season, and again, I appreciate you coming back. But before we get into our topic, tell us a little something about yourself that maybe we didn't hear last time.
Well, it's interesting. What I've been really moving towards is more of a philosophical look at security and moreover resilience. And it's really kind of led me to a pontification that is going to provide an article and some thought leadership that's going to be coming out here in Security Technology Magazine. And we talk a little bit about, security, what the program is, organizational elements, and I'm starting to think more about operations and how we can show that ROI to organizations. It really kind of, falls in line with like social engineering and what I coined in this article, which is from the Latin amat victoria curam, which is essentially that those that are prepared are victorious.
What is it that I remember back in the days of Oprah, that luck is defined as where preparation meets opportunity? I think that was the definition. Do you recall? And that's very similar to what you just said.
I really believe that, in things that we do, we really need to start being proactive, and preparedness is going to minimize the old saying, and, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail.
Or if you plan and don't follow the plan, you failed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a lot more things now that we're starting to think about from an operational perspective, and some really unique philosophical things that are occurring in the industry right now that could create some significant challenges for security thought leaders and security leaders as a whole in the years to come.
Sean, you and I have both been in the industry a little over 20 years. Personally, right now, I think we are in a stage of the greatest change or potential for change that I've seen in my entire career.
I would echo that.
Do you think it's the technology, or do you think it's the way we are living in our social lives and how we as individuals are interacting with the world around us?
That's a really interesting, certainly that could be almost a panel discussion or another podcast to debate that topic. But I think technology has some aspects to it. I think the changing business environment also has some concerns. And then moreover, just the number of risks and threats that we're seeing more on the IT side and not so much on the physical side. Not that the physical side threats can be any less debilitating to an organization than the IT assets, just the IT threats are happening much more frequently.
Yeah, a few episodes ago, we had a few guests actually that have talked about really the conversion of IT and physical security, really from the organizational level. Once upon a time, we were able to keep these departments split, and anymore, most organizations are moving to a inclusion of both. One may be reporting to the other, or there's just a much closer dotted line to each other with both the physical security and the cybersecurity departments.
Yeah, I do see that trend as well. I mean, it's just a matter of fact because everything is really riding on these networks now, right? And inclusive of security data as well as information. It makes sense to leverage those relationships. However, there's a competing issue associated to that with IT security and physical security that needs to be vetted very carefully. And I think that's where we start seeing the chief security, or what I like to call a surety officer, come into play that basically oversees not only the physical, the IT, but also linkages to risk management, and provides a dotted line to the CEO and upper management, so we can really establish what are the concerns and how do we address those concerns, and where do we establish and finance those controls to minimize threats to the organization.
This really does already segue into the topic you and I are planning to speak about today, and that comes to the topic of social engineering. And when you study social engineering, it's not a new topic to most of the listeners on this call. However, social engineering is now being used both to penetrate a building's facility and physical assets, but also being used to penetrate the IT assets of an organization. So even on this topic, the merging of the two, that the disparate areas are now really one.
Yeah, I echo that as well.
Well, let's dive right in, Sean. You consider yourself a social engineer. In fact, you sent me a picture of yourself wearing a shirt boasting about your social engineering skills, per se. And by the way, listeners, I plan on posting that for everyone to be able to see, to share Sean's wonderful experience. But Sean, more than a shirt, your mind is what's going to convince us of your expertise. And that's not to put you on the spot. It's something that you're passionate about. And I enjoy the passion. And I think this podcast is going to be interesting. Just keeping our passions from going too long. So with that, though, let's go ahead and dive right into social engineering. For those who might not be familiar with the term, let's try to define social engineering for everyone.
I think it's essentially utilizing pretext to create deception or misdirection to achieve a illegitimate goal. That's how I would coin it.
So it's really built on deception?
Essentially, when you are conducting social engineering activities, it's complete deception. You're fabricating information. You're presenting information to corroborate or build a rapport and a trust with that individual to, allow you to gain access, or misdirection. So the entire social engineering components are all rooted in deception.
What I think is interesting personally about the topic, Sean, is it seems that the greatest risk and vulnerabilities to organizations, in my experience, really boils down to the people. It's a breakdown of an individual who often might trust someone too much, and that opens the door for that ultimate risk. My understanding of social engineering is just that. We're building rapport with someone in order to ultimately utilize that open door to cause some harm, most likely to that organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're applying social engineering tactics, it's essentially hacking the human.
So can you define or draw us a little picture, a mental picture of what this might look like?
Well, I think it's rooted in the social engineering basics, and really this is my own terminology that I've come up with to apply the principles that are used in social engineering. And it really begins with, leveraging what my wife calls the happy bubble. And that, everyone is really generally nice and they're not really doing anything bad and, no one's out to get me. And using that, I establish a number of components to, influence that mindset. One is, first and foremost, we need to build rapport. It's very similar to in investigations. When we're in an interview, we've got a suspect or what have you, and building that case, we have to build a rapport with the subject. So how do we go about doing that? Some of the information is really just out there. So many organizations have ID cards. So I can establish rapport very quickly by approaching a person, reading their ID card and saying, "Hey, Susan, it's nice to see you. How you doing?" Susan immediately is running, how do I know this person? Who is this? And she's initially going to be friendly with me because I was friendly with her, right? And then also, too, gaining information that's available via the internet. Unbelievable amount of information that I can use to build a rapport. Like, "Hi, Susan, I can't believe Jeff left the office this weekend. Is there any way that you could help me out with this document that I need to get? It's apparently on his computer. I can't get to it." Right? So she now understands I've called her Susan. She understands that I know somebody named Jeff who she reports to potentially. Now there's a rapport that has been built. So she doesn't really know who I am, but she understands that I have enough information, enough, locks, if you will, in the tumbler to me potentially exploit, right? And that is really establishing a relationship when one doesn't exist. And you can do it very quickly just by opening up with someone on a first-name basis. Secondarily, I think another component is asset development. And so, asset development is about identifying information, and we might use elicitation to gain information about infrastructure, people, places, mail, phone, email addresses, and what have you. And this information can be, again, used to build that rapport with the individual. And now we start looking at some of the processes around social engineering. And really, there's a couple components, and they rooted are either in sympathetic, like I'm going to lose my job, and can you help me? Asking for a favor. Many people are off guard and always want to try to help someone, right? But in other instances, you might need to use another approach, so not sympathetic, but authoritative. Do you have any idea who I am? You're going to lose your job over this. Just let me in the door. So it depends on how the rapport is established and the information is developed or gained through the asset development process to identify which approach we're going to use. And in some instances, it's just misdirection. I can use the environment to infer that I belong. Like, for instance, when I gain access to a building, the first thing I do is bring a roll of drawings or a clipboard. No one ever bothers me because it's the perception that I'm to be there. On tailgating, I might come in through an exterior entrance. It has a door. I'll present my card, which is just a fake card or just my own access control card. Would never work in the system. The card reader beeps. The woman is holding the door. The beep infers that I belong when it really doesn't. But people believe that beep means that you're authorized to access, when in fact, what it is just an accessibility component, right? And then there's other aspects, like you could be running towards the door and they're opening the door, hold the door for me, I'm late for a meeting, or what have you. Again, we're utilizing some of those sympathetic factors to, gain access to the facility. We can leverage some of the infrastructure that's in a building, such as a phone system. You can use a phone system to infer that you're someone in the building that you're not. Like, I can call the PBX, I can call the phone system for some organizations, and I can ask to be transferred to the CEO's office. I get the CEO's secretary, and like, oh, I'm sorry, they called me that I wasn't supposed to go to the CEO's office. I was supposed to go to Rick Klein in risk management. Oh, let me transfer you. Now, when it comes across the desk, Rick Klein's going to see it's coming from the CEO's office. So that's misdirection, right? So there's other different types of things in misrepresentation on, how we, approach each of these processes around social engineering. Misrepresentation, as I previously described, could involve the creation of assets such as documents or ID cards and giving the perception that I belong in that environment because I have a work order or I have an ID card that I printed off a $99 color printer. And then moreover, in some instances, social engineering just is testing it, just testing the circuit, see how stringent the security is. If they start kind of setting up a firewall on me when I ask just simple questions, I know that this may not be a potential opportunity for me to gain access, right? So there's a lot of components around social engineering. And essentially, these are the basics. And first is friendly, building a rapport, much like investigations. Second is asset development. Third is being sympathetic, utilizing sympathetic gestures to give an aspect of belonging. Authoritative is another way to identify with or create that belonging, or you belong in that environment. Misdirection is another way we talked about. And surveillance, just gaining access and information around about the facility, and then testing that security to see how likely you would be to succeed.
So, Sean, something that occurs to me as we're talking, and maybe right, maybe wrong, I always kind of smile at individuals who go to university for degrees that really are not going to offer careers that pay a lot. And so what comes to my mind is when I went to college, for my first couple years, I went through a music program, and I hung out with a lot of the drama kids as well. And they were going to school to get a drama degree. And, deep down, every one of us knew that none of us were going to go anywhere with music or drama, but we just loved it. It seems to me that if someone wanted to pursue a career that had value and income tied to it, this would be a perfect role for someone that has a dramatic background or someone that enjoys acting, because this is really all it is, right? Creating a profile, creating an identity, and learning how to work with people to build that rapport and gather that trust to then infiltrate. And in our case, we're not doing it from the bad end. We're just helping the organization see, hey, there are risks here. But do you see that as an opportunity for some that just enjoy acting?
Oh, I think it is absolutely an opportunity. It's one that's being used by a number of IT auditing firms and PCI compliance firms. And I would submit that anybody doing risk assessments and vulnerability assessments should have a working knowledge of social engineering, because when we look at doing assessment processes, and we talked a little bit about this before we started the show, vulnerabilities basically allow threats to occur, right? So if you are not doing social engineering, you're not examining some of these vulnerabilities and the likelihood for occurrence, they're really not vulnerabilities, because you're not seeing the threat occur. With this social engineering, you actually have a full-blown vulnerability. We have an awareness issue with our staff. And as you said, this is one of the biggest issues. This is one of the biggest issues with corporate security or any security program, is people and hacking those people to gain information or create a event within the organization.
Sean,
so it is absolutely a career path. And if you want to look at other organizations that are doing things like that, you can see red teaming and blue teaming is also starting to come about a little bit more, where we actually put teams that we've got the aggressor team and we've got the receiving team, and essentially they are working to the aggressor team is working to gain access to specific assets within an organization, and the receiving team is trying to prevent it or trying to detect them before it happens. And so this way we're really testing the security program.
Yeah, one of the hottest trends in the cybersecurity space right now is capture the flag. And so you have the teams, and everyone's trying to capture the flag, which is, of course, infiltrating the organization.
Yep. And it's, not a lot of people realize how easy it is to get into a building. It is very, very easy if you have a determined aggressor that has the skill set to basically gain access and then, gain access to specific assets. I've done testing, this type of red team type of testing for a number of financial organizations, and now I apply it as a surreptitious entry exercise, and that's C. And the reason it's called C is because we're actually seeing the vulnerabilities. And in many instances, I've gotten all the way into data centers that have SOX compliance, and you're not supposed to be in those areas.
No, you're not. And I think, it's probably important to clarify once again, just for some who are at the beginning stages of their knowledge on these topics. Anything that you and I are speaking about right now, we're not talking about how we damage an organization through these tactics. We are on the good guy side, and we are helping organizations see that these are risks, these are vulnerabilities, and this is what can happen. And the reason I'm going into this clarity, I just want to make sure everyone understands there is a group of people out there called ethical hackers. They are not the bad guys. They're the good guys that are doing the same things that the bad guy may do, but just trying to beat them to the punch so that we're ready for it and we are secured against what may happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we don't have organizations or you don't have programs that are doing that, you're at a disadvantage to your peers.
I think that's the key to any successful interaction in life is putting yourself in the shoes of the other person. And so really what we're doing and what I'm hearing you do and what you do in your day-to-day life, Sean, is you put yourself in the shoes of another and say, what might someone else do? You do that, and we show what that might mean. And for those who are new to this, I got to tell you, this is actually a lot of fun, and you'll quickly become passionate about the topic.
Yeah, I mean, when you do these kinds of exercises, your heart really starts beating. I remember one time I was in a facility and I'd gained access, and all of a sudden I heard like keys rattling, and it was a security officer walking around the facility, right? And I hid underneath that cubicle but I could hear him coming a mile away, and he was talking on the microphone and what have you. And this led me to some realistic controls that could be implemented, like, take the keys off. We want to be able to detect these individuals. If the aggressor hears you coming a mile away, then he can basically, get out of your path. I mean, it's like Keystone Cops almost to some degree. So a lot of really innovative controls come out of these types of testing programs that you wouldn't see in a hypothetical vulnerability risk and threat assessment. Like that ADA card reader, you can turn that off, where you can turn the beep off, or even better, if someone goes in there with a card that's unknown, it'll beep 3 times. Now we can trigger that to awareness programs. So there's a lot of knowledge that can come out of these types of assessments.
Absolutely. We're talking in theory, Sean. I know that there are several different YouTube videos out there that would provide some insight on what social engineering can mean. But let's dive into a real life scenario or a case study that maybe comes to mind just to make this real to everyone listening today. Do you have something that comes to mind of where social engineering was used and it impacted the organization it was used against?
Sure. So I'll give you one example. I had a facility, and we're going to apply misdirection in this social engineering exercise. So first, I'm in this building. Essentially, it's got a breezeway, and in that breezeway, we've got a staff security officer, access control, and basically connects to a building that I need to gain access to, and not able to do it. But what I want to do is make myself known. So I'm walking around the facility. I have really no place to go except up and down the elevators, on the floors. I make it look like I belong in the facility to the security staff. And I'm there for a good, couple hours, right? At which point I start to see that the security officer has now been removed from the door. It's still access control. It's still locked. And I am trying to gain access. So what I did was I went up to the security officer and said, hey, listen, I forgot my car keys. They're upstairs. Can you let me into the building? Absolutely not. Very straightforward on policy procedures. Sorry, sir, I can't let you in there. You'll have to call your wife or something along those lines. Come on, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. If you could do it, really appreciate it. I trade everything, sympathy and everything. Very hard, fast. No, it's not going to happen. So I finally said, okay, well, can I speak with your supervisor? Well, you can talk to my supervisor, but he's going to tell you the same thing. Okay, fine. So I talked to the supervisor. Sure enough, supervisor says, absolutely not, da 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 da. But I'm talking in a tone like, oh yeah, uh-huh, yeah, right, uh-huh. And he says, is there anything else? And I said, no. And he hangs up. Now he's off the phone. But I continue to talk. Yeah, no, yeah, I know I've done it to you before. Yeah. Well, do you need to talk to him again? No. Well, dude, I really appreciate you're going to let me upstairs. I won't forget again, and take care of those kids, and we'll I'll buy you lunch tomorrow. Okay, thanks again. I click the phone, I hang up, and he's like, he said he's going to let you upstairs. I'm like, that's what he said. He's like, I can't believe this, and he let me upstairs.
Wow. Was that unescorted access that was granted to you?
I got up to the floor that I needed to get into, and then he went back downstairs because he thought the floor was locked and that I wouldn't be able to get in. But then I was able to get in via another method.
Very interesting.
So the challenge behind this type of stuff is, and it's really caveated by one of my clients' comments in a debrief for an exercise that I did, was he goes, yeah, I get that you can break into the building. I get you can break into the building and you can take stuff. I get that. What I don't get is how you can break into the building, do a bunch of stuff, and we didn't even know you were here. That's the power of these types of exercises.
Sean, the problem with social engineering is we rely heavily on technology, at least those of us in the physical space. And if we defeat the human being, often we defeat the technology as well. So what are some ways we can protect our organization from a social engineer trying to harm our organization?
I think that's really great. One is that training, absolutely training, and training at the most highest levels. You would be surprised to see how easy we can apply social engineering tactics in areas that you wouldn't think they would work, like security, like with the CEO's secretary, VIP, people that handle cash, because they wouldn't expect it otherwise. They're kind of in this, secure mindset, and that no one would ever approach them, which makes them, somewhat likely to be approached. From a best practices standpoint, look at awareness, communication, team up with IT, to bring forth not only social engineering tactics and approaches, but also training some countermeasures into that. And that should be across the board, but specifically in those areas I talked about, such as with security, with CEOs and what have you, CEOs, secretaries, and what have you. And then, moreover, testing. You have to test this to see, what types of issues you're having, where the awareness program needs to be refined. And then I would also advocate that you tell people that you're doing this testing. But when we're doing this testing, if we get someone who challenges us, we reward them for that positive engagement. Kind of like Pavlov's dog in some way, essentially we're rewarding for good behavior. But when there's negative, like they don't catch us, we don't necessarily approach it from a reciprocity standpoint, because that could create a significant impact in the organization in the adoption of some of these awareness programs. And then finally, I think absolutely clear in many things that I'm seeing missing from awareness programs is incident management. Reporting. If a secretary gets a call and it's kind of a weird call, they should make an incident report on it. If there is someone making a fish via computer, I want to know about it. So these are the components where we can start seeing what types of tactics are being used and how we can address and refine our awareness programs to meet some of these challenges in the future, because these tactics are going to continually evolve, right? So we need to train people on specific components, such as I described, sympathy, authoritative, misdirection, and what have you. And, just following up. A lot of this is just about communication. If you have someone that indicates that, they're the, CEO's admin, or, in that case where I was talking about Susan and I was looking for Jack and what have you, and I was trying to build a rapport, Susan can ask additional questions. Right? Well, when did you see Jack last? How's his kids doing? She can ask basically qualifying questions to determine if I'm really who I say I am, and do I really have those relationships? And it's a great way to just ascertain if you've got someone basically applying these principles. We don't do that right now, and that's something that I think is going to be key in awareness program, is following up and basically ensuring that the information that is being presented is factual.
As you're talking, Sean, I start thinking about that TV show that most of us have watched, Undercover Boss. And in essence, it's social engineering taking place in just another subset for a different purpose. Creating identity to get information from individuals within that workplace that ultimately can be used for whatever purpose you want it to be used for. I bring up Undercover Boss really for a purpose. Do you believe that organizations can test their organization using these methods with their own team members? Or would you recommend hiring a firm that specializes in this and are really, in some ways, more professional with their acting skills?
I think that the greatest opportunity, if you have a firm that's doing this outside of your organization, they're coming into this fresh, so they have to have the asset development, they have to understand the culture, the environment, and there's other factors that might just be misrepresented because of bias. So I really highly recommend that organizations seek unbiased groups that have never seen the organization before, and basically give them a list of assets. Like, here's our most important assets. Once you get you access to this server room, this switch, this R&D area, or what have you, list those assets and let them go at it. And basically, if they're able to gain access to that, document that process via video camera or what have you, so we can actually see how they gained access and where compartmentalization programs or awareness needs to be done. If an organization does it internally, yes, but again, you have that bias. I know that the front entrance is continually used at lunchtime, right? We want to see it from an aggressor standpoint that doesn't have a mindset, and how long does it take them to gain access, and where do we detect them in the process? That's the best opportunity for identifying and when you're going to layer in these controls.
Another thought occurs to me, Sean. Many in our industry come from a law enforcement background. Many get into the law enforcement for the thrill of the chase in some ways. And some struggle when they move into the private sector that thrill has disappeared as it's become more of a political organization, more about standards, more about just ensuring things are done the proper way. And I can see that there might be some listening that get excited on this topic and would enjoy that thrill of trying this out, that thrill of seeing if they can use social engineering tactics to expose something in their organization. I just heard you say it's probably not wise to do that within your own organization. But what about networking with each other? Is this an opportunity where if I know the security manager of XYZ company, maybe we could help each other out and not have to hire other firms, but if we really want the thrill ourselves, we could see what we might be able to do helping each other?
I've never considered that, but I would think that would be a very viable method for implementing this kind of testing and avoiding some of that bias, the risk of that bias that I described previously. That's a great idea, actually.
Well, many of our episodes talk about the importance of networking together with our peers, and this just seems like a natural way of extending that network and building these relationships with each other in ways that we can support each other.
No, I agree with it. And certainly with a peer organization, if it's an exact peer, like I don't think you're going to see Apple and Google doing this together.
Correct.
But, from a networking standpoint, if you've got like an industrial complex and you've got a corporate, financial headquarters, there might be some opportunity there to, layer in and network with those individuals. Certainly there would be some memorandums that need to be applied and need to be some approvals from, upper management on both sides. But it would be a unique way to leverage and minimize some of the costs, and again, give you a fresh perspective on what types of vulnerabilities from social engineering are actually out there.
And a way to bring your heart rate back up again.
Yeah, absolutely. New environment, absolutely.
Well, I want to talk about one more item. You mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast how you're focusing a little more on the philosophical side of security, and I believe this question is a little more philosophical. We talk about training our humans within our organization and training them on following the proper standards. At the same time, many of us are teaching our employees the importance of customer service and treating individuals with high respect and giving customers what they want. And so we go along really in the happy box, as you mentioned earlier. We want to smile at everyone. We want everyone to feel good about themselves. How do we find that line of being happy, showing great customer service, yet having a level of skepticism of each and every individual you come in contact with?
I think that's a really great observation. The vulnerability that you described, emphasizing that happy bubble. A good example would be healthcare organizations that are really dedicated to patient care, right? And so they just openly are typically not going to be combative, or not combative is not the right word, but challenging towards individuals in their organization because they've been basically trained for that patient care satisfaction. And applying that to a corporate environment, certainly I do believe that there's some aspect of that as well that's driven by HR. But I submit to you that I can identify someone in a facility very quickly and come across as being helpful, engaging, and that's through a variety of methods of both verbal, tone, cadence, and body language that would help me establish if there's a concern with this individual by just taking some extra time. So, for instance, if I were stopping someone on the floor, I'm like, they've got a clipboard and drawings. Oh my God, you look like you're lost. Can I help you? No, I'm just doing, and he would respond, I'm just, doing a survey. Oh, really? Are you doing that for Cliff and Facilities? Well, yeah, I am doing that for Cliff and Facilities. Okay, well, great. I'll let you get back to it. Then I go back to my desk. I call security and say, hey, listen, I just talked with this individual. He had indicated we have a Cliff and Facilities. We do not. I think you should get someone up here.
So basically,
very positive engagement. The person is potentially there because I would submit to you that anybody that gets challenged usually abandons the act. I mean, I've been doing this for, 10 years, and every time I've been challenged by someone, I'm out of there because I don't know what they're doing with that information. But very open, very happy, if you will. But I have just now validated if that person really belongs here or not, without saying, who are you here to see? Who's your supervisor, right?
I think that's often the key is someone, I could walk into a facility and say the CEO's name by name because I can find that anywhere online. Sent me over here. I'm his good friend. He's asking me to do this, this, and this. A good number of people would open the door right up because they don't want the CEO to be mad at them. I would say that we need to help the employees understand that the CEO is going to be much happier having a phone call to him or his assistants to validate that rather than having a major theft occur because we were being too polite.
Yep, absolutely. And you could do that over the phone too. I mean, the CEO gets a call and, basically from accounting that says, hey, we need to open up an account. This is a super secret thing and I need you to do this on the fly. Will you go ahead? Sure, let me take all the information down. Okay, great. Yeah, you need this, you need this. Okay, great, no problem. I'll get this taken care of for you in the next 15 minutes. Hang up the phone, call up accounting, say, I just got a call from a guy in accounting says they need me to open up an account. The guy's name. Do you know anything about this individual? Or, oh no, he's been out on leave for 6 weeks. He would never call you. Again, it's all about just communication, and that communication is going to be tied to awareness, to the employees and teaching them, some of these aspects of challenging as well as communicating, attempts at social engineering exploits, but it's also going to be about individuals who have these issues communicating back. It's a two-way street, but we somehow in this technological world have made it one way.
Well, that goes also to what we talked about at the beginning. Technology's changing, but the way we interact societally is changing, thus why we're seeing such change in our industry. I'm going to use that to plug a future episode, Sean, that you're going to be very interested in. His name is Philip Tully, and he's an expert in the cybersecurity space, a big speaker within that space, actually. But his specialty is talking about how we, the employees, make our organizations vulnerable based on what we post on our own social media feeds. So our personal feeds often create vulnerabilities for the organizations we work within. And that is a whole nother topic, which is why we'll do a whole nother podcast for that, but it's upcoming, and I know I'm interested, and I figured you might be interested as well.
I am certainly interested in that, and I would refer you to the anonymity blog that I put up on my LinkedIn site that kind of addresses some of those aspects. We put a lot of information out on the web, and all that could be basically used in asset development for establishing rapport. So that should be a really great discussion and would coincide with this one.
Well, that's the goal, is just to make us all aware, make us better at our jobs, and keep our organizations and our own personal lives safe. Sean, I want to thank you for spending this time with us again. The information was valuable. Somehow we kept our conversation within the time period allotted, and so kudos for that. Again, for those that do want to reach out to you, what is the best way to reach you?
Best way to get a hold of me is either my email address, which is essentially my first initial last name at AEIENG.com. That's Affiliated Engineers. Or they can call me on my cell phone, 847-461-9359, or grab me on LinkedIn.
And as I always say, regardless of how you reach out to Sean, please reference this podcast. That way he knows where you have come in contact with him from. Sean, again, I want to thank you. It's been a blast, and we'll see you next time.
Scott, as always, a pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you about a very important topic.